Hello there, my lovely jewelry makers. I'm Christina of CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this beaded spiral wire knitted spool necklace. Now you get this really cool effect of the beads almost floating in a spiral pattern within the braid, and it works really well if you're using contrasting colours. So if you want to learn how to make your own, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we're going to need. First of all, the wire that I'm using is a 0.3mm regular round copper coated wire. And as for the beads, I'm using these 4mm rounds. Now personally I like to use a contrasting colour to the wire because that really makes the pattern that we're going to make stand out, but obviously it's your choice. And then the findings, I have my kumihimo ends here. I'm going to use those to finish off the ends of the braid with, and we have little loops at the end of them so we can attach our extended chain and lost or claw clasp using our jump rings. And then for our tools, we first of all need a knitting spool. So I'm using a 6-prong one here, and this is one with where the prongs are just these kind of sticks with the balls on the end. I find them to give a better result, and alongside this I'm going to be using this 1.25mm crochet hook. That's just the size that I like to use, but of course you can use a different size if you prefer. And so I'm going to have all the materials and tools in the description box down below, and links that you might need as well. So let's get all the materials ready and let's get started. So I'm not going to cut off a length of wire here because we won't really know how much we're going to need. Instead, what I'm going to do is work with the wire still attached to the reel. And what we also need to do before we start here is make sure that we add the beads that we're using onto the length of wire. So they're just going to be sitting for now. Push them down to the reel there so they're kind of out of the way. And then I have a length here that I'm going to start working with because I want to do a bit of the braid first before we start adding the beads into it as well. So we then need to grab our knitting spool here, and then I'm going to take my length of wire, and towards the end I'm going to put the open end down through from the top, so where the prongs are, and so it comes out on the bottom here because we just need to be able to hold on to that. So first off, what we need to do is basically do a round here where we kind of, you could say, attach the wire and go all the way around. So I'm gonna just have my wire come out between two of the prongs, doesn't matter where. Then I'm gonna go around the right side of a prong, go around the front, around the left, and then around the back of it. So I'm basically bringing it around in a clockwise direction, and then it comes around the back of the prongs, and then it's going straight to the next one where I'm then gonna bring the wire around in the same direction, and then we just want to keep going like this all the way until we have a loop, because we're creating these little loops here on the prongs, on each of the prongs. So that's the last one. I now have a loop on each of my 6 prongs. You can see it from the top there. Then we now start the actual technique, because this was kind of just attaching the wire like I said. We now need to, we're just repeating this. I'm bringing the wire around the next prong, which was the very first one that we started with, and I'm making sure now though that this loop that I'm just making now is sitting above the first one. So I have 2 loops there, but the first one I made sits below, and the new one that I just made is the top one. And then I just bring the wire around the back and just bring it out towards the next prong, and then I kind of like to grab onto it like this. And we now need to bring in our crochet hook because we now need to start moving our loops here. So that means I need to go and grab out of these 2 loops that I have on this prong, grab the bottom one from below, pull it out gently with the crochet hook, and then bring it up and over the prong, making sure the other loop stays on the prong, and then into the middle. And now you'll find, because this is the first loop, it seems a little bit loose, so you can just kind of pull at the tail a little bit. But then we move on to the next one, go around the prong, always in the same direction, and then we go and grab the bottom loop out of the 2, pull it out and bring it up over and into the middle. Turn it for the next one. And you can see we now just keep going like this. And this is basically the technique of creating the piece. We'll keep making a new loop on the next prong, bring in the loop that's already on there, up and over, and let it kind of hang out in the middle there. And then we'll move on to the next one. And we repeat with that. Now you want to keep doing this, and then occasionally I'm going to be grabbing onto the tail down here that's coming out through the bottom and just pull at it gently, because that's going to help kind of push the braid that we're making down through the hole all the way. And I'm just now going to keep doing this one loop at a time. And like I said, I'm going to make a section of the braid here with this technique without beads first of all. So now I kept going for a bit here, and you can start to see the braid forming. For now it's just inside of the spool here, but obviously eventually it will be coming out at the bottom when it gets long enough. But I'm just going to continue, and I'm just going to show you how to then add the beads in, because I'm going to start doing that now. So I'm going to continue the same technique, but as I'm doing it, I'm going to add in a bead every now and then. So before I make the loop around the next prong that I'm due to do, I'm just going to drop the bead down, and it's going to sit where it just can't go any further there. So technically it ends up sitting in between the two prongs. And then as it's there, make sure it stays there. I'm literally going to just do the next loop in the same way. So nothing changes as far as the technique. We're just occasionally adding in a bead. And by occasionally I mean I am doing it in a certain pattern, but I'm not doing it between every set of prongs there. So I just added that bead. So that means for this next round that I'm doing, I'm going to just complete this round without adding any more beads in. So I'm moving my way all the way around, one prong at a time. As you can see, just like before where we didn't add beads in. One prong at a time, grabbing that bottom loop, bringing it up and over, and then still occasionally just pulling at that wire on the bottom. And then the last one here before we reach the prong that comes just before we added the bead before. So this is kind of what we want to keep an eye on now, because what I've just done is more or less a full round. So we are going to add a bead in, one bead per round, but I'm going to be doing it. This is where I added the first bead in. I'm now going to add the next bead in between the two prongs just before it. So basically the space just before, which is where I'm at now. So I'm going to make sure I'm not doing that next prong, because then I would reach that space, and if I drop it in there, it would obviously sit right above it on top of that. So I'm going to make sure it's going to sit between the prongs in that space before it. And then I'm just going to continue. Starting the next round there, and you can see the beads are just off from each other. And now I'm again continuing all the way around, one prong at a time without adding a bead in, working my way back towards the bead that I just added before. But then making sure that I stop, just going to pull it a bit, at the right place. So I'm just doing this one, because then I can see if I do the next one, I'm going to reach the point where the bead is going to sit just on top of the previous one, which we don't want. We want it to sit just before. So that means I need to add in the bead now. So you can see it's going to sit in the gap just before the other one, and it's going to basically stack like that as we continue to add the beads. And then that's what creates that spiral. Use the right end. Because we're adding one bead at a time just off from each other continuously throughout. And again, now just continue with this round without the beads. And this is all there is to it, really. It's how you want to add the beads in to achieve that spiral. So just keep doing that until you've used up all your beads. So now I've used up all the beads on the wire here, I don't have any more left. And then you can really start to see the braid coming out on the bottom and see that effect that the beads have as well, giving that spiral all the way along, right down until here, where we didn't add the beads in the beginning. So what we then want to do now is continue making our braid here in the same technique, but just without adding the beads in, just like we did there in the beginning as well. So we get that same, about the same length before the beads start. So you just want to continue going around the next prong, using your hook. So continue this round all the way, one prong at a time, working my way back towards where I added that last bead in. Doing this one here, bring the bottom one up and over, and this is the point where if I was still adding beads in, I would need to add it now, because between the next two is where I added the previous one, but I'm out of beads and obviously I have the length that I want. So instead of adding the bead, we literally just continue. And then just keep doing this until you have about the same length, or you can count the rounds that you do, so the same amount of rounds as we have in the beginning. So once you've done that length here without the beads, all that's left to do is finish off the ends and get it off the spool. So first of all, because I'm done using the wire, I'm going to cut it off the reel and just leave a decent length here on the end. And then I'm just going to grab my crochet hook again as well, I have that handy, because I'm kind of going to do another round, but instead of just continuing to make the braid longer, I'm going to now finish it off alongside doing it. So I'm going to, instead of making a loop around the next prong like I would do normally, what I'm going to do is grab onto the loop that's already on that next prong, so just the single loop, and then lift it up and over to basically release it into the middle. And then I have the loose wire end coming behind it, and then I'm going to take the crochet hook, bring it back through the loop, but as I'm doing that, grabbing that tail of wire and bringing it through, so that wire is now coming through the loop. I'm going to move straight on to the next one, kind of just have that wire coming behind the prong, so that when I lift this loop up and over the prong, the very next one, put the crochet hook through it, grab the wire and bring that back through the loop, and just continue like this all the way around. So I'm basically releasing braid from the spool here, one loop at a time, but then we're also kind of securing the end in place, because this then prevents anything from coming undone by kind of feeding this end through all the end loops. So just do each one, working your way around. I think I have 2 left. Grab the next one, up and over, bring the wire back through, and the very last one, same thing. Grab the loop from below, up and over, and then bring the wire back through. And now I've released all the loops, so I can also now just pull, just doing it gently, but pull my braid out through the bottom of the spool here. So we're done using that. And then I have my length. Now as you can see, it looks a little bit different in different places. For instance, the beginning here is narrower than the end especially, but also the rest. So that's what we're going to work on dealing with now as well. But what I just like to do on the end here is I brought the wire through the end loops. I like to just bring it through, back through the first one again. And you can go through another one as well. Just so we kind of complete the circle fully and kind of overlap a little bit. And then I want to start pulling at this because I want to close up this end the same way the other end is nicely closed up. You can see it's not open like this one. So I'm just going to gently, you can also kind of bring the braid in a bit, so tighten it up, which helps close up the very end of it. But then I want to pull on this wire, which basically brings the loops in towards each other and closes up the very end, as you can see. So there we go. We then have the end just kind of coming out from the end of the braid there. So now we are left with this length, and we have our beads running in the middle. Now then it's time to even the braid out more and make the whole thing more uniform. So basically, like this, how this end looks here, this was the very beginning part that we made. This is kind of how I want the whole thing to look more or less. So obviously it's thinner and also become more uniform looking. So the way that happened was, it just kind of happened naturally as I was pulling gently at this. It tightened it up. So what we basically want to do now is manually do it to the rest of it. So I gently now want to continue. I'm just starting from this end that's already done it naturally. And I'm just going to use my hands and fingers and start going over my braid here a little at a time and just kind of tightening it up. So I'm doing it over the section with the beads as well, just to kind of make that a little bit narrower and tighten that up nicely. What you'll find is that the loops actually then get larger compared to how they were when they just came off the prongs on the spool. But you can see we still have that effect of the spiral. But then just take your time and nice and gently go over this all the way, and obviously continue all the way along the beaded part. And then on the end here, also do it with the other end that we don't have beads on. Now the ends without beads will be able to get a little bit thinner than the part with the beads in. So that's perfectly normal, but just keep doing it until you're happy with how it looks. Now another thing you can do as well is roll the braid a bit between your hands to kind of help settle it in place, and obviously get it narrow as well, or even against the surface. Now I do recommend that you use kind of a bit of a soft surface, not really soft, but this is like a foam that I'm working on, so not against a really hard surface. And I'm also not pressing hard onto the braid, neither in my hands or against the surface here, just gently kind of rolling it until we get it to that point where we want it. And also remember that as we're doing this, this actually lengthens the piece by a bit, so you want to keep that in mind as you're making the length, obviously compared to the length that you want it to finally be. So remember that as you're kind of measuring the length on your spool, it will become longer as we're kind of neatening it up and tightening the braid. So all that's then left to do is finish off the ends here. So we just need to get rid of the excess tail of the wire. So I'm just going to show you on this one because it's the same on both. So I take it and you'll find that this tail is kind of coming out more towards one side. So I'm going to grab the end of the wire and then bring it back over the top and then kind of over around the other side. And then I'm bringing it back through, making sure I'm going through some of the loops on the end here, grabbing onto them, and then I'm pulling the wire, and it then kind of basically wraps around some of the loops, and I'm going to go through in the same place, and I'm basically just going to do this a few times. You can kind of push the wraps together a bit, and this is really just to secure it before we go in and cut off the excess. So just do it a few times, going through. You can do something like this, it's fine. And then I'm kind of going to bring it around as if I'm doing another wrap, but I'm not bringing it through. What I'm going to do is cut off the excess, just leaving a short little tail of about 1 millimeter or 2. So we can see that sticking out right about there. And then all I'm going to do is take that and just kind of continue that wrap and bringing that end in through the wire so it gets tucked away. And you just want to repeat that on the other end. The way that I'm then going to finish off the ends here is by using these kumihimo ends. So we need to attach these over the end of the braids there. Obviously we need to do that so they don't fall off, which means I'm going to be using my E6000 glue. It's nice and strong and it dries clear, and it also works really well with metal, I find. So I'm just going to grab some here on my toothpick, and then I want to add that inside my kumihimo end. Now we don't need to fill it up completely because obviously the end here of a braid needs to go inside, but it doesn't take up loads of space because obviously it's kind of just some lengths of, or loops you could say, of thin gauge wire, and there's quite a bit of air in between them. So what I also like to do is, once I've filled up my kumihimo end, I then take whatever excess I have and bring it on the end of the braid, and I also make sure that I get it in between the wire, because that's then going to make it really nice and secure when we add the two pieces together. It's going to adhere nicely, and obviously when the glue dries it's going to really be secure long term. So basically adding some glue in between all the nooks and crannies, something like that. Then just want to add the kumihimo end over the top of it. Make sure to push it as far in as it'll go. And then you want to repeat on the other end as well, of course. You just want to let them dry, and you have these loops where we can attach our clasp. So that's how you make this beaded spiral wire knitting spool necklace. Now of course you can make it whatever length you want to, so you could easily make it a bracelet as well. But I think it's a really cool effect of almost looking like the beads are floating in this spiral pattern inside of the braid. And that's why I mentioned earlier as well that it will give you the best result if you're using contrasting colours between the beads and the wire. Now I would love to see if you make your own version of this, so please feel free to tag me. I'm going to leave links to everywhere you can find me in the description box down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.